Welcome to The Golden Flower. Join Angela Levesque and myself, Gemma Kauffman, as we explore the beauty of living a creative life and dive into the depths of consciousness, the archetypal journey, and the artistic process. Through insightful personal stories and inspiring conversation, we invite you to expand the parameters of your being and trust the aliveness within. This is The Golden Flower, a sanctuary for your creative soul.
Welcome to the first episode of the Golden Flower podcast. You're here with coach, artist, meditation teacher Gemma Kauffman, and myself, Angela Levesque. I'm also a meditation teacher, writer, and transformational guide, and we are so happy you're tuning in. If you'd like to know more about us or the work that we do, the links are posted in the show notes. Today's, for the first episode, we are talking about creativity as an act of rebellion. Osho said, creativity is the greatest rebellion. And what we're really getting to the heart of in today's episode is that creativity is not only important for our own individual growth and development, but I would argue, and perhaps Gemma would as well, that it's necessary for the future of humanity. So before we get there, because this is our first episode, we want to talk a little bit about the golden flower and what it means to us and what we really hope it means for you. So, Gemma, how are you doing today?
So good. love this moment that we've been waiting for to get this rolling. So thank you.
Yes, thank
Really happy to
you.
be.
So I'm gonna, pose that question to you. What does the golden flower mean to you? Because this was actually, it started with you. So I want to hear where it came from.
I think it came from this desire to be really close to those deep and meaningful conversations, which, we use that word sanctuary in our tagline. I feel like that's always been a sanctuary for me, that place to kind of the conversations that can bridge the gap from something that's going on in the imagination and the ideas realm to kind of something that can make sense in the world, because I'm very in my head, and I think this is what's great about talking with you, is that we've got a great kind of, we've got so many parallels and shared interests, but somehow when we go to familiar terrain, it's like puts us in this place of discovery. Like I hear things for the first time really fresh, and it's just got this enlivening feel. So the golden flower, when I was first thinking about it, was wanting to get that kind of conversation going around how important our creativity is, knowing that without having access to these really important conversations in my life, I would probably not have made any of the work that I've somehow managed to do over the years. Yeah, just finding that collaboration with you is definitely sparking it to a whole other level. It's the aliveness, we've got this symbol of the golden flower. You just picture that in your mind and you see something that's really radiant and really open, really receptive, and that kind of fullness that kind of speaks to me about this potential that we all have within, that is kind of guiding us forward.
I want this podcast, at least for me personally, and I hope that the listeners have the same experience, for it to be sort of a touchstone, like a catalyst, a piece of inspiration that they can kind of connect to, that keeps them involved in their creative life, and for myself to see some of those projects come to completion. So I also am excited. I did my very first podcast back in like 2012, and I started it is because I wanted to have these juicy, nourishing conversations that I wasn't able to have in life in person. And I thought, well, I still, I was a new mother at that time, and I wasn't able to go out that much because I was a stay-at-home mom, and I'm like, but I still need to have the opportunity to dive into those topics that I care about and get excited and feel inspired. And so at that time it was an internet radio show that then became a podcast. So I had that outlet, and I'm excited to engage in these conversations with you so that I have that outlet that gets my juices flowing and that I can think about during the week and be like, oh yeah, that was really cool. And she sparked something here and have me think about it in a different way. And so yeah, I'm hoping that it'll be that touchstone for myself as well as the people who are listening, and that they can go and have that spark of imagination, intuition, that spark of like, I'm ready to get shit done after tuning in and listening. So very, very exciting. Well, as I mentioned today, we are talking about creativity as an act of rebellion. And my friend and author, Jacob Nordby, he wrote this book. It's called Blessed Are the Weird, a manifesto for creatives. Before we get into our topic, we wanted to play with the idea of sharing something that's creative. And so I wanted to start today with a little poem that he wrote in his book, because I think it'll really kind of set the stage for what we're about to talk about. So it's called Beatitudes for the Weird. Blessed are the weird people, poets, misfits, writers, mystics, heretics, painters, and troubadours, for they teach us to see the world through different eyes. Blessed are those who embrace the intensity of life's pain and pleasure, for they shall be rewarded with uncommon ecstasy. Blessed are ye who see beauty in ugliness, for you shall transform our vision of how the world might be. Blessed are the bold and whimsical, for their imagination shatters ancient boundaries of fear for us all. Blessed are ye who are mocked for unbridled expression of love in all of its forms, because your kind of crazy is exactly that freedom for which the world is unconsciously begging. Blessed are those who have endured breaking by life, for they are the resplendent cracks through which the light shines. I almost got through it. And that is a perfect example. His book is really about why it's so important for creatives at this time to like show up in their creative lives, in their creative selves, and that it really is necessary, but that it is an act of rebellion. And that's what we're going to be talking about today after we take this short break. Hello, fellow seekers and creators. Thank you for listening to The Golden Flower, a sanctuary for your creative soul. If our podcast has awakened your imagination and you feel the creative impulse stirring, we'd be so grateful if you could leave a review or share an episode with a friend. Who knows, it might just be the spark they've been waiting for. And for those of you who want to go deeper, join the conversation. Share your reflections, your dreams, and creations with us using hashtag #TheGoldenFlowerPod on Instagram. Your thoughts and projects matter. Let's play with the possibilities. Your creative life is calling. All right, Gemma, we're talking about creativity as an act of rebellion, and you have a great story about this. So I'm going to let you share that and kick us off as we dive into this topic.
I guess I have maybe been described as a bit of a rebel since a young age, and even though I don't really identify with that much, I know that that kind of impulsive pushback choices that maybe characterize a rebellious attitude, I know have been really, really important for me, and I probably would not even have like my whole painting journey without it. So yeah, the story you're referring to is like, yeah, I mean, I think there's like two levels of rebellion that went on. So the first one is really on a practical level, and not many people, when they're really struggling with all areas of life, I imagine, would decide that spending their very last 30 quid in their bank account on a canvas to paint when they don't even, I did not even paint at that stage. To think that that was a good choice, a good use of resources, and so forth. So, but actually it turned out that it really was. And I mean, a little bit of context is, you know, I'd kind of come back to the UK, having like recently kind of walked my way back to a healthy place after having a bit of a burnout meltdown, exiting my previous life as a teacher and so forth. And at this stage of my life, I was trying to find a foothold in freelance careers. I was determined that I wanted my creativity to be more central to my existence, like as something that I was actually doing, as you know, what I was doing for my career, not just something on the side. But that takes a lot of time to build that up. And you know, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, having that foundation of secure place to live, I was just on my friends' couches. I was estranged from my family who were not too happy with my choices at the time. I was embroiled in a very toxic romantic relationship, which was really, really difficult. And all of these things were going on. And washing up, you know, shifts in a cafe whilst trying to get things going. So the irony that doing anything creative was like the furthest thing from my mind, because you're just in survival mode. But I was really fortunate that a friend of mine who, no stranger to wing it herself, but was an established painter, recognized what was going on and kind of saw that I was going to make myself ill again. So I was always just so stressed out and so fraught about everything. And she suggested a day of painting at her place that we could create a temporary studio. And I just was like, yes. And before I know it, we were splitting our funds and setting that up. And so it's like, in a way, you could say rock bottom is helpful sometimes, because like, what difference does it make? You know, it's 30 quid. Okay, I'm going to be. So on that level, sometimes, I don't know, is there a thin line between reckless and anyway, the decision was made. And there we were, we find ourselves back at her place. And we got these big, it was 2-for-1 deal. We got these giant 1 meter 1 meter by 1 meter 20 canvases, very excited, sharing out the paints, but we're completely silent. It's just this feeling like we're going to do some work. Had no idea what I was going to do, no thought of plan or anything like that. And in that moment in the blank canvas, this kind of takes me to what feels like the most important bit of rebellion that happened in this process, because in that blank moment of going to the canvas, I could feel that the inner critic was like hot on my heels, ready to be like, what are you going to do? You better make this good. Just like, you know what I mean? No pressure. But I was like, I've got to do something quick before that inner critic gets hold of me. And I'd had a friend coach me and plant the seed in me, like, you need to think about putting some roots down in yourself. And at the time I was like, I don't know what that means, but I want to know what that means. So I just grabbed this pen or chalk or something like that, and I just started squiggling these roots, like really like quickly, like in a trance, nothing realistic, just the idea of roots, like squiggling down like this. And quickly I entered the flow state. And this is probably why I associate painting with such a positive thing, because it helps me escape the back chat of the judgment and the criticism, and I get into this place very quickly through the repetition. And I associate painting with the ability to all of a sudden get a bit of a distance on everything that's going on internally, all that pressure and back chat and all that stuff that's going on. But I feel safe because I'm in that creative flow state, so I can kind of witness what's going on internally, but I don't get lost in what's going on internally. And that has been such an important part of my creative journey. And we can talk about this in so many different ways. But in this moment, I'm having it happen real time for the first time, where I'm like, oh, there's a bit of space opening up. And I can hear all the punishing voice about, you know, about how I'm trying to do all these things and it's not working. And it's that familiar, I can't. But what was really pivotal was, as I just kept going and kept going and kept going, like still on the run, I heard this other voice just kind of drop in there really calmly, this little question: what if you can? And it's just like, ooh, it's like, when we think about that pushback, sometimes we think about that defiance, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. And I was very familiar with that kind of thing, but this was a bit different, because it's like the whole tide of my inner world is going in one direction, which is like that negative overwhelm. And then this little light comes on, like, what if you can? Just really calmly just drops that question. And because I think about rebellion being a bit like turning on the tide. It's like everything's going in one direction, and against the odds, you kind of turn to face it, or you do something unexpected. You kind of challenge the moments. Like everything's going this way, and then something happens which just turns it in another direction. And that changed everything. It really did change everything. I associated the painting process with the ability to open up space and have that little voice come online and go, what if that first painting put me on a path of painting that had such energy, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with that kind of internal rebellion that went on.
You're right, like, I see the wave, like, it was your rebel who got you into that studio. It was the person. I love, though, that your rebel had
Mhm.
2 voices. Your The first rebel is like, "Yeah, I'm doing this. I don't," like, "I'm gonna stand against that wave." I can absolutely see that person, like, standing tall as everybody is coming and going the opposite direction. And then you're the
Yes.
soft voice of your rebel that says, "But what if you can?" But that's what the
Yeah.
rebel is the nonconformist, is the one that says, "No, I'm gonna go against the grain." And usually the rebel is driven by, like you said, purpose. It's driven by what feels right. It's like we have this impulse within us that just says, "No, I just can't do it your way. It just doesn't feel right. It's not
Mm.
meaningful, it's not important enough to me, and I just can't do it that way." And, so I love the soft and the hard voice of the rebel in your mind. Camus, who says, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." That's the freedom. That's liberation.
Well, just because as you were speaking, it was like, oh, the other really important dimension here is that there was the invitation from the fellow artist who recognized, no stranger to winging it herself and just being in that slightly more stable situation, able to extend that all important invitation to remind me because, I was completely disconnected from the whole thing I was fighting for in the first place, which was to experience my creativity, as part of my life. I couldn't be further from it. And then there's just this beautiful hand reaching out, being like, I know where you're at, and I kind of I want to put this forward. And who else is going to offer that other than a fellow artist who's also like, I don't know. There's just something about that. I always really come back to that moment, get it in my heart, like, oh, what a beautiful thing to everyone else is like wanting to offer advice on this practical level, and then this whole thing of like, want to spend the afternoon painting, and you can criticize that and say that's escapism, or and my inner critic was going, yeah, this is so irresponsible. This is exactly what your problem is. This is perfect proof of why you're struggling and all this kind of thing. It was really full on. But I noticed a distinct increase in my confidence and way of being when I came out of the painting process. And I didn't complete the painting that day. I actually did it in 4 more stages. And there was a big gap in between because of the practicality of it being quite big, and it kind of moved around. And perhaps in another episode we can talk about like when I finally got it finished and what was going on at the time. But even when that first stage happened, suddenly I'm thinking more clearly. I'm having a much more clear perspective on what to do just in the moment on that everyday level with my life. And we don't often think that a moment gifted of doing something like going into an instinctive painting place like that is going to bring online the problem solver and the confidence and wherewithal to kind of keep going, the encouragement, all of that. It was unexpected. I didn't know that that was what was going to come out of that session at all. So I think again, it's that make an unexpected move, probably receive an unexpected gift as well. So
Having people in your life, um, who encourage you to take that leap are just invaluable. Like, we all need to have those people that, um, not just cheerleaders, but the people who know you well enough to say like, let's do this. You can come up with 101 reasons why not to do it, but you need to have those people that can recognize that they need to help you across that threshold. Also, part of the reason when I think about this topic, I think it is so necessary, like you and I have already talked about, and we'll be talking about probably for the rest of this all of the episodes, is bringing in this idea of meaning and purpose and why that's so important. And I think when we talk about this idea of creativity as an act of rebellion, why it's so important for me is because our whole society right now is designed to keep us complacent. Like it's designed to keep us comfortable. So much of us are just on our screens and scrolling, and we have these, vested interests that are interested in commodifying our attention, basically. And there's so many things right now that are like vying for our attention that it really, really is an act of rebellion to say, hey, I am going to step out of that. I'm going to step out of that stream. I'm going to step out of that complacency of just kind of, scrolling on your phone and looking inside and how am I doing today? And how do we express what's going on? And, one of the things that makes me so sad about right now, and it makes me sad as a mother who works in schools sometimes and seeing how much our youth are like addicted to their phones. And there's something that we're losing when our attention is so externally focused. And so I really think it is time for us as an act, like to really connect with our inner rebels and say, no, like this isn't the life that I want for myself. It's not the life that I want for my son. It's not the life I want for my family. And we have to say, okay, so how do we counterbalance all of those things? How do we rebel against all those things that are vying for our external focus, right? Our external attention. I think that we a little bit of us dies on the inside. Like we need to, turn our attention back inward and like figure out what's going on within our hearts, what's going on, within our bodies, and what are we really embodying, and then having the opportunity to express that. And that could be on a canvas, it could be through words, it could be through dance, it could be through like cooking, it could be through any number of things, but we have to start looking inside of us so that we can bring that what's inside of us outward instead of just letting the world pass us by through like the lens of our screens, which I find really disheartening actually.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you just were walking us through that. And then, of course, I know that even with, my whole background of fighting so hard through pain and all these different creative journeys, I'm scrolling more and more these days myself. And everything you say just it's so powerful. And I was trying to connect these dots as you were talking about, switching from the external to the internal reference point. And as you were talking, I was remembering that a big part of what's going on is that there's so many demands on us in so many different ways. I don't know, this is a new idea coming, but the level of exhaustion, even when we're doing pretty well with our routines, there's a kind of sense of being under the amount of energy that we need. And the thing about the creative act and going internal is it's the difference between like getting that hit from a scroll on Instagram where you're going to have that kind of like, wow, there's always something there that feels like you're getting creatively stimulated. And it's such a what was coming to mind is the appeal for me when I'm really tired, which I am these days as well, also as a mother and with a toddler, is that you feel so safe because it's like, I know what I'm going to get. It's going to be a manageable level of like magazine flipping style thing. And it's going to feel like I get just a little bit of what I want. And I'm going to be okay with that. Whereas the alternative, which, we're advocating for, that deeper connection with self, and then bringing what is within into expression, as you were saying, whether it's the written word, the spoken word, the visual, the, who knows, all these different myriads of forms, that takes us into the unknown. I think about working a muscle, the muscle of what it takes to push back against the tide, the muscle of what it takes to throw that phone down in the moment and choose something else. I've these stories that I'm telling are like over 10 years ago. I've lost that muscle. Part of the inspiration of wanting to do the podcast is to rebuild that muscle, like build in a little bit of that defiant choice making, which I agree is wholly necessary, because we think it's happening just individually, that we just go in this direction. It's not a coincidence. It's not an individual thing. Collectively, this is what's going on. It is you put it beautifully, like there is a vested interest in the way that we will behave in this complacent way and be accepting of our, get your little hit from Instagram, get your little hit, like
Your little
that's
dopamine.
all you yeah,
And
exactly.
that's, I think about, I know that you're quite spiritual and I'm very spiritual, and definitely in the spiritual communities, they talk about creating the new world, and that we are thinking about creating a new way of being. And we require imagination for that. We require vision for that. And we lose, like, I like that you talked about it as sort of a muscle. We lose that muscle if we're not using it. Like, we need to be able to think outside of the box. We need to be able to visualize something more beautiful for humanity. And we can't do that if our focus is so myopic. It's so like stuck on a screen, watching things that are being fed to us, instead of this idea, this spark of imagination blooming from within. And so that's why, like, I think that living a creative life isn't just important for growth and development of the individual. I think it's absolutely necessary for humanity. We need people who are connected to meaning. We need people who are connected to beauty. We need people who are connected to purpose and have a way to express all of that, all of everything they feel inside of them. They need to have a way to express that outwardly, and that doesn't have to be in a formal way on a canvas. Like I said, it could be in play with your children. It could be dancing in the kitchen while you make dinner. Like, there's lots of different ways. We need to practice bringing what's inside of us out. And I think it's absolutely essential as we think about creating a new world. Like, what's next for humanity? So
I mean, the thing is, that moment is not coming to us ever on a plate where it makes us easy to make the choice to do something that's a little bit more checking in with ourselves and making that move to something creative. It is never going to arrive. And as each year passes, it's like less and less likely the way that we're going absolutely the other direction. We fill ourselves with content on top of exhaustion. Like, that's the direction that things are going. And then, like you say, it's like, how are we going to build the muscle under these circumstances to remember to have like that presence of mind? And as you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that everything we're describing is like, there's like two I don't know, the word is like sides or tones about this, because one is like to take that pause in that stillness. There is, when we're on the go all the time and listening to stuff as we go, and in that kind of space where we're getting the dopamine hit because we're going through the to-do list of the things that are never ending, all that kind of thing. It's very hard for something to emerge out of that. But we're so resistant to just being still for a moment, just taking that moment of stillness. And I think the other flip side of it is, as we started off talking, that there's a velocity and speed and impulsiveness that comes with that rebellious choice making, which I feel like you need both. You need this kind of dynamic where you choose the stillness to kind of just be with yourself for a moment in quietness, which is probably one of the most radical things people can do at the moment. It's just like unplug, unplug, unplug. I'm going to sit here. I don't know what I'm doing. It's like very,
I'm
very
bored.
difficult to do. Yeah, be bored. Whoa, what's that? And the other side of it is that recognizing that sometimes, well, for me, this happens a lot. Like it's when I'm doing everyday mundane stuff that I feel like that confident energy sometimes coming, and I have to sometimes decide like what's the priority here, because I know what's worked well in the past has been that impulsive decision making, but now these days, family life, completely different life, way more cautious about it and thinking about the consequences and blah blah blah. So I think there's something here for me, and I don't know, maybe for the listener as well, that it's like we can recognize the truth and the ideas that we share, and then there's this gap between how it works in the practical life. For me, what I like is that we've got that meta picture which you're painting, which brings me like, remember to just choose the stillness, where you're just going to feel a bit awkward about not knowing what's happening for a little while. And the other one is, how do you ride on a impulse or a wave, because you want to move quickly through a transition, like quickly through the decision to put the laundry down for a moment and choose something else. You need a velocity to do that. So you've got that. I don't know, that's where I was going. I was listening to you.
Well, I think we probably got to wrap this up pretty quick. So when we get back, we are going to follow the aliveness and wrap up this episode. We'll be right back. Hello, fellow seekers and creators. Thank you for listening to The Golden Flower, a sanctuary for your creative soul. If our podcast has awakened your imagination and you feel the creative impulse stirring, we'd be so grateful if you could leave a review or share an episode with a friend. Who knows, it might just be the spark they've been waiting for. And for those of you who want to go deeper, join the conversation. Share your reflections, your dreams, and creations with us using hashtag #TheGoldenFlowerPod on Instagram. Your thoughts and projects matter. Let's play with the possibilities. Your creative life is calling. Okay, so in this last segment, Gemma and I decided that we want to kind of just pull out either from this conversation where we want to go for this next week, as in our own personal lives and our own creative lives. Maybe wrap up. We're not exactly sure. This is an opportunity to kind of to play. So Gemma, after this conversation, what's alive for you? How are you going to go into this next week?
Blazing. I was enjoying how listening to you was bringing that dynamic of remembering to choose the awkward moment of stillness, and I was kind of imagining what that would look like and when I could build that in. But I think also knowing how important it is to have that velocity through transitions, I was thinking about having one of the complicated things I have about reaching for any kind of painting. I'm thinking out loud, like at the moment, the problem is that if I get that impulse, there's too much stuff in the way. Like I'm like, oh, I don't know where anything is. So I'm making it much harder for myself. So I'm just thinking what it would be look like to just kind of momentary decide in a moment, just kind of zoom towards like a corner of the room where I know there's going to be some materials there. My intention is going to be to take those windows where every day there'll be a little bit of scrolling at the moment, and switch that for kind of I do this action, like I'm going to throw the phone and I'm going to go to where there's like a little pile of materials. Like someone gave me like a nice set of brand new colored watercolor pencils, something I haven't used properly since my childhood, and I'm like, just have those, and then just see what you can do in 15-20 minutes, because I know that will feel, I don't know, again, I don't know how that will feel because it's been a while. That's what I'm gonna do, make it more accessible. And I think that's key for me, to have these moments kind of pay off throughout the week. I'll let you know.
For myself, I am what dropped in for me while you were talking is I've always told myself that I'm not a painter. I think I'm going to try to paint this week just for fun, just to go and just play with it. That will be like my activity. I've already cut out most social media out of my life, but I feel doing this show, that might be something I need to revisit. That'll be a whole show in itself, but I want to dive into something that's uncomfortable this week. And so I'm going to try
Mm.
painting, and I'm going to see if I can get my son to do it with me. And he's 16, so he's probably not going to like that, but forced family time is always enjoyable.
This is
He
That's
needs to get off his
cute.
screen too. So
Mhm.
yeah, Robert Thurman said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because that is what the world needs, is people who are alive." I hope that you felt something stirring inside you listening to this, and I hope you think about your inner rebel. What are you ready to stand, or to stand against the crowd in whatever way that looks like for you?
I've got
So
to jump in because you offered something, sorry to interrupt, but something too good to miss, which was you just made the link with the rebel acts as being something uncomfortable. And again, we don't like to hear that, we don't like to hear that, but that is so crucial. And I love, and I know from talking to you that this is a big thing for you to nominate. Okay, I'm going to go towards the painting. It will be so interesting to hear what that's like, but it's coming with you kind of willingly being like, this is going to be uncomfortable, and going into it, which is the same thing with the stillness and the silence and kind of being in there. And we should definitely come back to this point, because it's not what we want to hear, but there's so much available with that. So not only are we working the rebellion muscle, we're recognizing that that's probably choosing something that doesn't feel comfortable initially, because there's always something on the other side of it. And that's hopefully what you're going to come back and share with us.
yes, and so if you felt inspired as well from this conversation, I will definitely share my painting on the Golden Flower Pod on Instagram. I will make sure that that gets up there, even if it's crappy, because that's not the point. And if you feel inspired and like to share with us what you did this week, if you let your inner rebel loose, we'd love again for you to share that with us. Hashtag the Golden Flower Pod on Instagram. Well, next week we are talking about like the creative identity, the idea of who am I, and both Gemma and I are mothers and wives and partners and all of that, and so we want to explore how we get back to the essence of who we are and talk about ways that we can do that.
Yeah, we want you, yeah, follow the aliveness, whatever that means for you. Nurture that spark, whatever that little spark is, take care of it. And we wish you a good week.